Hey everyone, I've been working on this tender finder AI agent for my company, and while I was fine-tuning the prompts, a crucial part of building multi-agent systems, by the way, I thought, why not bring you along for the ride? In this video, I'll walk you through my entire process, from planning, designing, writing, all the way to testing agentic prompts. The goal is to show you how I create reusable prompts efficiently while keeping costs down and increasing reliability for my AI agents. Let's get started. Now, before we start writing our prompts, these are the steps I usually go through in developing a prompt. And as you can see, I'm not saying writing a prompt, I'm saying developing a prompt, because writing is just one part in the development process of the prompt. So the first thing I would do is I would define the problem that I'm trying to solve and the goal I want my agent to achieve. Now I'll show you how I define this for my Tender Finder AI agent. Now after I do that, the second step what I would do is I would define the steps in achieving the goal. Now for example, I might have maybe 3 steps or 4 steps in achieving the goal that I just defined. Then after that, what I would do is I would try to categorize the steps that I defined in the second step. And for example, if I have 4 steps in the second step, what I'll do is I'll categorize 2 steps and assign it to an agent, and categorize the second one and assign it to another agent. And this is exactly how I define the roles and tasks of each agent. After I do that, what I'll do is I design the system architecture. Then I would move on to define the data flow between the agents. For example, if I've defined 2 agents to be in my agentic system, what I define is how data flows, or how agent 1 communicates with agent 2. And this depends on the agentic framework that you're using. Finally, this is where I start the iteration of writing the prompt, testing the prompt, and then refining the prompt. Now, back in the days before I came up with this flow, I would spend actually days writing the prompts because I would skip all of the other steps. Let's move on and see how I defined all of those steps for my Tender Finder AI agent. Now, before I start explaining the goal of my agent, I want to give you a bit of context, right? So one of the main income streams for my company is through applying for governmental tenders or bids, right? And for me to find those tenders, what I would do is every 2 days or every 3 days, I would have to go through tender listing websites that usually has a list of tenders, and I will go through them to find tenders that match my requirements. For example, tenders that are software related or in a specific country. And then what I would do is I would list out all the tenders that I'm interested in, and then send it to my team to prepare the expression of interest or proposals to apply for those tenders. Now the problem is usually I get too lazy and I forget to, or I might end up finding a tender that may be 2 to 3 days away from the deadline. So I would either have to stop everything to work on that one specific deadline, or I would end up missing opportunities. So I thought, why not develop or build an agent that could automate that process of looking for the tenders by scraping through the tender listings from different websites. So this is why I came up with the idea of building Agent Scout. The main goal for Tender Finder AI agent is to find tenders that match requirements, then notify me through Telegram. And the steps in doing this is match how I do this process in real life. This is how tender listings look like. So you would usually have the tender title, the location of the tender, the TOR reference. Some of them might have the budget, and you might have the deadline in there. It won't show you the details right away, so you'd have to click on this one. So manually what I would do is I would filter out the ones that I'm interested in. Then after that, I would open the ones that I'm interested in different tabs, and then I would go to the details of each one and then further filter out, replicate the exact process using my agent. So the first step for my agent would be scrape the tender listings, so filtering the listings of the tenders. And now I would move on to the third step. Notice that in the second step, I still have the listings that look like this, but I still haven't scraped the details for each tender. So I've only filtered the list of the tender titles that I would be interested in. Now, after I do that, then I would move on to step number 3. This is where I would want to scrape the tender details for each filtered tender. So usually tender pages, single tender pages would look like this, and it would have more information, the team requirements, sometimes you might have the location, travel requirements, all of those information inside each tender. After it scrapes each tender, it would have to go through another filtering process. For example, maybe filter out every tender that requires bit security of 100,000. After the second filtering is done, I would want the list of final tenders to be sent to me and my team through Telegram. So now, after I defined my steps in achieving the goal of finding the tenders, this is how I defined the roles and tasks of agent. Let me show you the architecture so you can have a clear picture of how I define the roles and tasks for each agent. This is the workflow for my agent. We'll have 2 main agents. So the first agent is called Tender Listing Filter, which is the agent that is responsible to scrape the tender listings from different websites. So you can see these are the tools. And then what it would do is it would perform the first filtering process. After it's done doing that, then it would send the filtered list to the secondary filter agent. Now what the secondary filter agent would do is go through each tender, go back to the website and scrape the single pages for each tender, and then go through the secondary filtering process of investigating each tender information. For example, if it requires traveling or not. Once this agent's done with the second filtering process, then I have a function in here. This is not an agent, this is a function. This Telegram function would send the list of the final filtered tenders to me and my team through Telegram. This is how I define the roles and responsibilities for each agent. This is called the sequential architecture. Now that I've defined the roles of each agent and the architecture of the system, let's see how tender listing filter sends the data to the second filter. So since I'm using LangGraph to build the agentic system, LangGraph have this thing called state management. You could think of it as some kind of a variable if you're a programmer. And what it would do is after the tender listing filter performs the first filtering process, it would save the filter tender list in the state. And then once the process go to the secondary filter to access the filter tender list, it would have to access the state variable and then get the filter tender list from there, and then perform the secondary filtering and the secondary scraping. And then the process will go through the last function, which is the recorder and the Telegram, and then Telegram function will be able to access the final filter tender list and then send the list of tenders. So this is how the data flows. So this is in LangGraph, but in Crew AI, it doesn't use a state, but it uses a context. So it would actually send the data or the filter list from the tender listing filter to the secondary filter. So instead of accessing the state variable in here inside the secondary filter, you would have the result of the agent number 1 as a context in here, and inside the secondary filter, what you could say is, oh, do this to the list of filters that you've received from the tender listing filter. Now that you've understood how I defined my data workflow between my agents, let's get into writing the prompt for the 2 agents that are involved in finding the tenders. So as you can see on the left, I have a folder named Scout. I usually like to name my agents. I have 2 files that has the extension of the MD, and this is because I like my prompts to be in a markup format. Now I've seen some people use XML. Problem with XML is as your prompt grows and becomes more complex, the syntax of the XML becomes more complex. So it makes it so much harder to debug later and refine your prompts. Now I want a syntax that gives a structure to my prompts at the same time give that natural look, and markup was the perfect choice for that. If we start with the tender finder prompt, you can see I have predefined structures in here. I start with a role and persona, and then goal and objectives, and then step-by-step instructions, and then additional context, and then available tools, and then rules. So this is a template that helps me write prompts faster. I want to explain something called prompt layers. So in agentic systems, every prompt usually have 2 layers. You can make it 1 layer, but you always want to have 2 layers. The system layer, which includes instructions or prompts that are fixed. So this is basically the context for the agent or the identity of the agent. For example, this is where you want to define the name of the agent, personality of the agent, the role of the agent, specific specific output rules and all of that. This part is a fixed part that you don't change. Now, the input layer is the part of the prompt that changes. So usually input layer might be the user's text or the user's chat. Now, in the system layer, you can say something like, you are helpful assistant, your name is Bob, your answers should be short. This part usually don't change, and in LangGraph, they usually call it the system message. Now, if the user puts in what's your name in the chat box, you could see here it says Bob, it remembered the name, it also applied the second instruction, which is your answers should be short. If you execute this prompt third time, you could see that this part still hasn't changed. So your helpful assistant, your name's Bob, your answer should be there, and then if the user asks how are you see the output saying just fine. I hope you understood the difference between the system layer and the input layer. Now let's get back to our prompt. I will be uploading this prompt template to the GitHub, so you can find the link in the description down below. Let me show you the two layers, from the role, the persona, the step-by-step instructions, all the way to the output formatting are the system prompts. After that are usually the input layer. Now let's start creating our prompts. So the first place I usually like to start is the goal section. So I already have my goal. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste my goal. Now my goal for my agent is to find tenders using the scraping tools and filter them based on user specific requirements. So this is the main goal for my agent. The second section I usually go to after the goal is the step-by-step instructions. Now let me paste my step-by-step instructions. So the first step that I want to do is I want to tell the agent to scrape tenders using the available tools that will be mentioned in here. I have about 5 websites that I want to scrape from. So I created a different tool for each website because each website have different structure. Now after that, the second step is applying the filtering rules, and I will show you the rules that I will be pasting in here. Now the third step is filter the tenders that you just scraped based on the user requirement. Now after I'm done with this one, I usually jump to the rules, and these are all the rules that I've came up with for my agent. So the first thing is the content length. Return only the exact matches on the user requirements, no additional commentary. Of course, that's one rule. And the second one is the formatting. So I want this agent to return strictly JSON format, and then the language and style, use the original tender title. Here we come to the date filtering rules. So this part is important. Now the first line is include the tender if the closing date is empty. So I've already showed you how the listing look like. So some of the website might not mention the deadline of the tender. So I want to include all of those tenders that have an empty closing date. I want to exclude 2 other tenders. I want to exclude the tender if the closing date is before or equal to the current date. I want you to also include the tenders that is less than 7 days from the current date. Now going back to instructions, I want my agent to apply all of those rules first, and then I want it to filter the tenders based on the user requirements. Now after that, what I do is I go to the output formatting. So this is exactly how I want my output to be. I want it to show the title, the exact tender title, organization name, posted date, closing date or the deadline, location of the tender, URL, source, and content. So this is how the output of the filtered tender will look like. Now let me go back work. Now, of course, since we're not going to be using any available tools, I'm just going to leave the tools as it is. Now let me work on the additional context. What I want to include in the additional context is current date. As the time of this recording, the current date is 22 of January. Since I'm running this manually, I'm going to have to hard code the date, but later, of course, this will be a placeholder in Python. Now, let me go back to the role. Now, in the role, this is where I name my agent. So I've named my agent Scout, and you are acting as procurement analyst. And the reason that I chose procurement analyst is because I want this agent to be familiar with the procurement procurement process and terms like expression of interest or TORs or RFBs. Now that we're done with the whole system layering, let's go to the input. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say find tenders related to technology or software. I'm going to add a little bit more requirements or criteria. So I said tech focus, software development, enterprise, AI solutions, digital, exclusion criteria, non-tech related services, hardware only procurement, and basic IT support below minimum budget threshold. This is the user's input, and this is what I'm going to be able to customize based on my own needs. Now, since we're not going to be able to run tools, let me hard code the JSON that I'm going to be receiving from the tool. The JSON that represents the scrape tender listing. I have a variable in here, or maybe I have tender list in here. Let me paste my JSON. So I'm simulating the data that our agent will be receiving from the scraping tools. Now, to test our prompt, we're going to use a Python library called LLM, which is an amazing library that lets me run prompts in my terminal. First, if you want to install the LLM library, what you could do is you could just run pip install LLM, hit enter. Since I already have it installed, I'm not gonna install it. After you install it, to make sure that you already have it installed, you could just click on LLM models to see if it runs properly. Now, these are the models that I already have in my system. You're going to need to set up your OpenAI keys. And to do that, you can just run LLM keys set OpenAI, and then you're going to hit enter. And this is where you're going to paste your OpenAI API key. Now, after you do that, you can run LLM models again, and then you're going to see all of the OpenAI models appear. Now, let's test our prompt. So to test our prompt, what you could do is, let me clear this one out. Make sure you are in the same directory as your prompt. Run LLM, then you could choose the model that you want to run your prompts in. And usually I start with the smartest model. Because I'm not going to use O1, but I'm going to use O1 mini. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a file name after that. So bam. Now, before I run this one, let's go through the tender list that we've pasted in, and we're going to make sure that the prompt filtering the tender list properly. Now, to do this, have the tender listing separately. The first requirements and the user input is saying find tenders that are related to technology. Let's go back to the tender listing. Here are some samples of tender listing. Let's find all of the tenders that are related to technology. Now, supply and installation of solar powered water pumping systems. This is not related to technology. TOR for integrated tax management system, which is in Peru. This is one technology. Is construction of emergency shelter units and community sector in Haiti. Of course, this is a construction tender, so this is not a technology related tender. This is also a technology related tender because it's supply and delivery of data center hardware. Let's go to data transformation services for NHS healthcare records management system. So this is another technology related tender. And let's go to the last one, supply and installation of industrial kitchen equipment for public schools. We found out that the list of the tenders that we have, only 2 are related to technology. So once we run, our prompt should only return the 2 tenders or the 2 JSON that has the tenders that are related to technology, which is number 1, digital transformation services for NHS healthcare records management system, and the second one, which is the TOR for integrated management system. Now, let me check one more thing, the closing date, because remember that we've set in our rules to exclude tenders, right? That is before. So let's check if the 2 technology related tenders. So the closing date is 1st of March 2025. So this haven't passed the deadline. Now the second one is the closing date is empty. So this one should be shown to us too. Let me come back here. Let's run our prompt. Oh yes, I made a mistake in running it and spelling the name is O1 mini. Let me run it. Bam. Now you could see that it filtered the tender listing successfully and showed us the only 2 JSONs that are related to technology. Let's tweak the data to make this one before the current date. That means this one has the deadline. So let's just go back to tender listing. So this is the TR for integrated tax management. Just go all the way. Yes, this one. So what I'm going to do is instead of March, let me just say Jan. This is before our current date. So it should not show us this one. So let's run our prompt again. Nice. You could see it's only showing us the tender that has an empty closing date, and it's also related to technology. Now let me test it one more time, and instead of saying related technology, let's just say related to construction, because we had one that was related to construction. It was around here. Water pumping. Yes, construction of emergency shelters in Haiti. Now let's run it again. Oh, we actually had 2 lines that says find tenders that are related to technology and find related. So let me just delete this one, save it. Let's clear up our terminal. Let's run it again. Nice. Deleted some of the other criteria or key focus. Now it only shows me construction related tenders, and you could see how the input layer is customizable. Now let's move on to the second one. Now that we have the output of the first prompt, which is a list of tenders that are related to technology, here that the tender content is empty, and here the tender content is empty. Since this one is the output of the first agent and that it will be the input of the next agent, now the next agent's responsibility is to use those URL to scrape each tender's information and then save it inside of the tender content. Now let's go to the second filter prompt. Now to save us time, I've already prepared everything. In the role, I'm saying you are a procurement analyst, and notice that I haven't included the name. On the sequential agentic processes, the first agent is the agent that you actually want to name, because that is entry point of all of the other agents. This is a procurement analyst. The goal is to scrape tender details and filter results based on user requirements. And of course, this one will be receiving a user requirements in the input layer. So the step-by-step is use available tools to scrape each tender content by passing the JSON list of the tenders, and then filter the tenders based on the user requirements and filtering rules. Now, of course, let's change this to 22 of January as the time of this recording. Now, this is where I mentioned the available tools to scraping. So since I'm running prompt manually, just gonna paste in the result of the tools. And on the constraints and rules, this is all of it the same as the tender finder prompt. Apart from that, so in here I have a few other rules. JSON is output. Tender content should be a summary. Now, after it scrapes each tender, I don't want it to paste in the whole content inside of the tender content. I want it to only put the summarize of the content. So this is what that first rule is. Then if any values in the original tender list are empty, find the values from the tender content. Now, sometimes what happens is, I don't know if you can see here, closing date is empty, and this is because of some of the tender listing websites have or the deadline, and some of them might not actually put the deadline in the first listing page. Now what I want the prompt to do is analyze the content that is scraped for each tender, and if it finds the deadline inside of that content, actually include it in the output. So we're going to see if it includes in the output. Now the output formatting is the same. I just want the title, the organization, the posted date, the closing date, the location, everything. On the input, the tendering list, I've included the 2 JSON or the 2 tenders that are related to technology, that we've received from the tender finder prompt. Of course, the scraping tool will get the information using the URL and then paste it inside of the tender content. But since this is just a testing purposes, what I'm going to do is I already pasted sample tender content or page. So we have the bidder requirements in here, and we have bid security, and we have duration and timeline on all those other information. Let's keep down. I know this is a lot. Now this is the second tender, all of the other information. I have users list. Now what I'm going to do is do the same. So instead of tender finder prompt, what I'm going to do is change the name to secondary filter.md. Now let's run it. Now, one thing you could see is it summarized the tender content for each tender, number 1. And number 2, one thing you're going to notice is the second tender that we've passed as an input didn't have no closing date because it was the output of the first prompt. Now, if we go, where's the second one? This is the second one. As you can see, the closing date was empty, but what it did is it followed the rules and actually put the closing date back as the output. So that one is successful. Now it showed both of them. So this location is Peru. Now this tender's location is in the UK. Now what I'm going to do is let me try filter it by location. So let me act as a user and say find tenders that are related to technology in the UK. Save it. Let's run it again. Now it should only show tenders that are in the UK. Nice. Now it only showed me tenders that are located in the UK. Now what I'm going to do is, we sometimes actually avoid tenders that require something called tender or something called bid security, or which is some kind of a money guarantee. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, which is related to technology and doesn't require bid security. Now, this is one of the best thing about AI is the questions from the user is so unpredictable that the prompt is so good to actually handle the questions and give back an accurate response. So what I'm going to do is let me run it again. Basically, one of the tenders had a bid security requirements, which was the one that was in Peru. Now, as you can see, bid security will be returned to unsuccessful. Now you can see that it only showed. So this bid, as you can see, bid security amount was 100, and this is the Peru tender. So it excluded the Peru tender and it only showed me tender that is in the UK. Amazing. Really sometimes surprised me, honestly. I hope this gave you a clearer look at how practical agentic prompts work, how data flows between agents, and how to test everything using the LLM library. In the next video, I will walk you through how I built this agent from A to Z using LangGraph and integrate it with Telegram so I can receive daily notifications about new tenders I might be interested in. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe for more documentation and insights on multi-agent systems. See you in the next one.